Summer 1940 had arrived, but Europe was anything but peaceful. Hitler's gaze was fixed across the English Channel, eyes burning with obsession. Operation Sea Lion, the grand plan to invade Britain, was meticulously mapped on countless war room tables in Berlin. Maps spread across oak desks showed troop movements, naval convoys, and the exact sequence of attacks meant to crush Britain before winter's chill. Hitler's confidence was unshakable, or so he believed. Yet beneath the polished surface of German military precision, doubts festered. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel warned of potential disasters. The Kriegsmarine, Germany's navy, was fragile, untested in prolonged amphibious warfare, and wholly unprepared for the Royal Navy that patrolled the Channel. Admiral Erich Raeder, the supreme commander of the Kriegsmarine, had been vocally skeptical. He knew the English Channel's tides, storm patterns, and the possibility of British mines could transform the invasion fleet into floating coffins. Hitler, ever impatient, demanded relentless preparation. Troops drilled on mock beaches along the French coast, storming against sandbags and wooden bunkers as if rehearsing for a grand theater performance. Pilots of the Luftwaffe practiced coordinated air raids over English coastline replicas. All around, an air of inevitable victory permeated the ranks. But there was one problem Hitler didn't anticipate: the British had learned from history. Coastal defenses were reinforced, radar networks expanded, and the Royal Air Force, though battered in the initial blitzkrieg, had rebuilt with an indomitable resolve. Intelligence reports warned of air superiority battles that could decimate German transport ships. Hitler, however, dismissed the warnings. Victory, he believed, was simply a matter of timing. On August 13, the Luftwaffe launched the Battle of Britain in earnest. Wave after wave of bombers struck cities, docks, and airfields. The London skyline glowed red with incendiaries. The British people endured. Winston Churchill's speeches, broadcast over the airwaves, fueled a national fervor that the Germans underestimated. Every night, Hitler's generals would gather to discuss strategy, but every meeting ended with the same uneasy silence. Something was shifting. By late September, the Luftwaffe had failed to achieve air supremacy. Fighter pilots, young and terrified, recounted terrifying dogfights in the skies above Dover. They described being outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and driven to desperation by British Spitfires that appeared like phantoms against a backdrop of fire and smoke. Hitler's frustration grew, his patience thinning. Operation Sea Lion hung in the balance, but a critical realization was dawning: without control of the skies, the Channel crossing was suicide. In Berlin, Hitler raged in private, slamming fists on tables, demanding answers. Every failure in Britain was catalogued, every lost aircraft a mark of humiliation. Generals tried to reason, explaining the inadequacy of naval forces and the treacherous weather. But Hitler, the man who had promised a swift conquest, felt his own plans slipping like sand through fingers. The decision weighed heavily, unseen by the public, unseen by history. Would he gamble everything on an invasion doomed to fail, or would he retreat, keeping the image of invincibility intact? And then came October, cold and gray. The winds across the Channel howled like a chorus of doom. Ships prepared for amphibious assault sat in French ports, tethered to hope and steel, while the Luftwaffe faltered against a resilient RAF. The invasion, the grand operation that could have rewritten history, began to feel impossible. Soldiers whispered in their barracks, sensing a tension that had no outlet. Somewhere deep within Hitler's mind, a terrifying thought emerged: maybe Britain was unconquerable. The roar of Spitfires and Messerschmitts filled the skies above the Channel. Each dogfight etched the contours of an impending decision. Hitler, still confident on the surface, was forced to confront the unbearable truth: air superiority could not be claimed. His generals presented figures, raw and cold. German losses soared past 1,700 aircraft, while the RAF lost fewer than 900. The Luftwaffe, once an unstoppable storm, was beginning to crack. Hitler's obsession with bombing cities instead of airfields, the infamous Blitz, was proving catastrophic. Civilians suffered, but the RAF rebuilt, dispersed, and struck back. Every night, London burned; every day, German losses mounted. Hitler, isolated in the Führer bunker-like atmosphere of Berlin command rooms, refused to heed advice. Yet the cracks in the German military machine were growing impossible to ignore. Field Marshal Erhard Milch of the Luftwaffe warned that a successful crossing required air dominance and naval control. Admiral Raeder added that rough seas, combined with Royal Navy patrols, could annihilate even a fleet of hundreds. Hitler's response was frustration, bordering on fury. "We can't fail," he shouted, slamming maps. Yet deep in the shadow of his mind, a seed of doubt began to grow. By early October, Hitler authorized a strategic shift. Bombing raids would focus on London, the industrial heart of Britain, but military targets remained elusive. Airfields remained functional, radar stations operational, and the morale of the British population unshaken. German pilots faced exhaustion, their nerves fraying under constant counterattacks. Among the Luftwaffe, pilots whispered tales of heroism and terror. Young men like Oberleutnant Franz Müller flew perilous missions, watching comrades plummet in flames, witnessing civilians scream as bombs struck their neighborhoods. Each sortie was a gamble between survival and the unfulfilled promise of victory. In their letters home, fear and fatalism mingled with pride, a duality that mirrored the larger crisis enveloping Hitler's command. The Luftwaffe's failures were compounded by logistical nightmares. Fuel shortages, maintenance issues, and an overextended command structure strained the operational capacity of Germany's air force. Reports of supply delays and miscommunications reached Hitler, whose patience was threadbare. Every setback, he believed, could be overcome with sheer will, but some forces, natural and human, resisted even the dictator's ambitions. As autumn deepened, Hitler convened the Supreme Command. The air war, the lifeline for Operation Sea Lion, had reached a critical impasse. The generals presented unambiguous evidence: without air superiority, the Channel invasion would be slaughter. Hitler faced a choice few men in history have confronted, the choice between ambition and prudence. It was a moment that would shape Europe for years to come. The decision, however, was not simple. Hitler's ideology demanded victory, total and uncompromising. Yet as commanders argued with unprecedented clarity, the Navy could not guarantee the safe crossing of troops, the Luftwaffe was faltering, and Britain remained defiant. Every scenario outlined disaster. Hitler, who had once thrived on risk, now felt the chilling weight of inevitability. By late October, the cracks became impossible to ignore. Morale among generals fluctuated between desperation and cautious relief that failure had not yet occurred. Hitler's inner circle, including Göring, Keitel, and Jodl, tried to sway him toward postponement. Hitler's temper flared, yet beneath the surface, an acknowledgement of reality had begun to take root. The war in the air had decided more than just the skies, it had determined the feasibility of a land invasion that could have rewritten the map of Europe. The Channel, once a serene boundary between nations, had become the greatest obstacle Hitler faced. Operation Sea Lion required a complex amphibious assault, thousands of troops, hundreds of vessels, and perfect coordination between air and sea. Yet the Kriegsmarine was not prepared. Hitler had expected a formidable naval force capable of confronting the Royal Navy and ferrying his divisions safely across the narrow waters. Reality, however, was starkly different. Raeder's reports were grim. Germany's surface fleet was too small, lacking the firepower for a decisive confrontation with the Royal Navy. Minesweepers, landing barges, and supply vessels were insufficient. In simulated exercises along the French coast, barges had sunk in rough seas, infantry practice assaults had failed repeatedly. Hitler had expected swift amphibious dominance, but the sea, unpredictable and relentless, defied the precision of German engineering. Hitler's obsession with timing created further complications. A delay might allow Britain to reinforce coastal defenses, speed risked catastrophic naval losses. The Channel was a fickle adversary, and weather forecasts suggested increasingly violent autumn storms. Each day brought new uncertainty. Amid these concerns, Hitler's inner circle debated options. Some proposed postponement until spring, others suggested a limited landing to probe defenses. Hitler, increasingly impatient, insisted that success was mandatory and imminent. yet the evidence against him grew undeniable. Meanwhile, intelligence reports highlighted Britain's preparations. Coastal fortifications were reinforced, radar systems had advanced, troops were ready to repel any amphibious assault. Hitler's generals, aware of the risks, emphasized prudence. The Luftwaffe alone could not neutralize the Royal Navy. Even if air supremacy were achieved, amphibious logistics remained perilous. Hitler's frustration reached a fever pitch. In private, he wrestled with the impossible choice: gamble on a potentially catastrophic invasion or preserve his forces for campaigns elsewhere. The stakes were global, the consequences unimaginable. Each day, the probability of disaster increased. The Royal Navy prowled the Channel, storm clouds gathered, German troops trained endlessly on mock beaches with a sense of looming futility. By mid-November, Hitler made a decision that shocked his generals: Operation Sea Lion would be indefinitely postponed. The official explanations cited logistical concerns, weather, and the need to focus on the Eastern Front. Internally, Hitler recognized that without air superiority and a capable navy, any attempt at invasion would be annihilation. Germany would redirect its ambitions elsewhere. This choice, one of the most consequential in modern military history, would spare Britain from invasion and alter the course of World War II. Hitler's decision was a mixture of strategic insight and reluctant pragmatism, an acknowledgement that even absolute power had limits when confronted by the relentless realities of war. The winter winds of November bit through Berlin's streets as Hitler stared at the maps that had once promised triumph. The postponement of Operation Sea Lion left him in a rare state of uncertainty. His generals, relieved yet wary, moved carefully, aware that the dictator's mood could shift from icy calculation to explosive fury in an instant. In the war rooms, officers debated priorities. Some urged concentration on the air campaign, others on building a more capable naval force. But Hitler's mind wandered elsewhere, into fantasies of conquest, of swift victory over Britain that had now been put on hold indefinitely. The Luftwaffe, though battered, remained his pride and obsession, and he demanded continuous sorties over England to maintain pressure. Meanwhile, German pilots faced the stark reality of attrition. Oberleutnant Franz Müller, once full of bravado, now questioned the purpose of the endless raids. He had seen comrades burn in midair, parachuting into chaos below, civilian cries echoing in memory long after each mission ended. Every sortie carried the weight of inevitability. Without naval support, these missions, however brave, were preparation for an invasion that would never come unless Hitler's ambition overrode logic. In London, life carried on amid destruction. Citizens endured nightly bombings, and yet morale remained unbroken. The ingenuity of Britain's defense, air raid shelters, radar stations, fighter coordination, proved that technology, courage, and unity could defy even the most audacious plans. British pilots flew with relentless precision, often risking everything to intercept waves of German bombers, their courage providing the psychological edge Hitler had failed to anticipate. Hitler's obsession began to alienate some of his top advisors. Göring, once the embodiment of Luftwaffe pride, grew defensive under scrutiny. The failures in the air campaign became a source of tension. Blame shifted among commanders even as Hitler publicly maintained that all setbacks were temporary. Yet the cracks ran deeper than anyone dared admit. Germany's confidence, previously unchecked, now required careful management to prevent outright panic. By the midpoint of November, the Führer faced a personal and strategic reckoning. The Channel invasion, postponed indefinitely, now existed in reports, diagrams, and whispered conversations rather than concrete military plans. Hitler spent hours alone in his office, imagining the alternative history, what Britain would look like under German boots, the speed of conquest, the domination of Europe. Yet reality intruded, the Channel remained unconquered, the Luftwaffe strained, and the Royal Navy ever watchful. It was during a particularly tense briefing that a young officer suggested alternative strategies. Hitler listened but remained agitated, his mind juggling ambition and pragmatism. The officer spoke of the Soviet Union, of opportunities to expand eastward. Hitler's eyes narrowed. The postponement of Sea Lion had created space for new campaigns. But still, Britain remained a lingering obsession, a thorn in the side of German pride. Mid-story call to subscribe, seamless integration. By the way, if you're clinging to this moment with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More waits just ahead as the story unfolds, revealing secrets and choices that shape the course of history. Amid this strategic shift, the German High Command began redirecting resources to alternative theaters. Troops previously allocated for Sea Lion were reassigned, and the focus turned toward preparing for operations in Scandinavia and the eventual campaign against the Soviet Union. The psychological toll on commanders and soldiers alike was profound. Some felt relief, others, anger. Ambition had collided with reality, and the result was a mixture of frustration and grudging acceptance. The winter skies over the Channel were now quiet, save for sporadic Luftwaffe reconnaissance. The invasion fleet lay in French ports, unused, almost ghostly against the grey water. Hitler's dreams of conquest had been delayed, and with delay came reflection, a dangerous enemy for a dictator. The failure to conquer Britain became a silent pivot point in the war, an unacknowledged turning moment that would have ramifications for years to come. Winter deepened, and Hitler's thoughts became increasingly consumed by the tension between his desire for immediate conquest and the operational limitations before him. For the first time, he confronted a hard truth: even absolute power could not bend nature, technology, and human resistance simultaneously to his will. The Royal Navy's dominance of the Channel remained unchallenged. Every attempt to imagine a crossing was haunted by reports of British destroyers and cruisers, radar detection, and minefields. In private, Hitler admitted, if only to himself, that the sea was a more formidable adversary than he had anticipated. For all his bluster and tactical genius on land, the ocean remained implacable. The Luftwaffe continued its efforts over England, though with diminishing returns. Losses mounted while British air defences improved, each sortie exacting a psychological toll on the pilots. Franz Müller, reflecting on the missions, wrote in a private journal, "We fight a ghost. Every day we chase shadows of an impossible plan." His words captured the frustration of thousands, soldiers bound by loyalty but haunted by the limits of human endeavor. Hitler's inner circle attempted to maintain morale, balancing reports of victory with stark warnings. Goering promised eventual air dominance, but each successive week eroded credibility. Supply issues, winter storms, and the unrelenting resilience of Britain created a narrative that even Hitler could no longer ignore. By January, Hitler made a critical public statement: Operation Sea Lion would remain on hold indefinitely. Propaganda continued to emphasize imminent victory, but internally, a strategic pivot toward the Eastern Front dominated planning sessions. The postponement of the Channel invasion allowed for an unforeseen opportunity. Hitler now had the resources to focus on a different theater, one that would consume Europe in blood and fire, the Soviet Union. Yet the human cost of abandoning Sea Lion weighed heavily on commanders. Soldiers trained endlessly, knowing that the culmination of their efforts might never materialize. Franz Müller, witnessing exhausted crews and empty ships, questioned the very purpose of their sacrifices. The psychological burden was profound. Abandoning a plan of such magnitude was unprecedented. Hitler had demonstrated both restraint and pragmatism, a rare combination for a dictator. The British, meanwhile, were unaware of the near miss. Londoners continued their lives amid rubble and fire, confident in their resilience. Every bombed street, every heroics of the RAF, had contributed to the illusion that their island was unconquerable. The paradox was clear: Hitler's obsession with rapid conquest had blinded him to the operational realities that now dictated restraint. Spring approached, and with it, new operations took shape. Hitler shifted focus, initiating planning for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The postponement, and effective cancellation, of Sea Lion freed divisions, resources, and strategic focus for what would become one of the largest and most consequential campaigns in history. The consequences of abandoning Sea Lion were profound. Britain remained a bastion, a staging ground for future Allied operations. The Royal Navy continued to control the seas, the RAF maintained air superiority. Germany, meanwhile, redirected forces eastward, engaging in campaigns that would eventually stretch logistics and morale to their breaking point. soldiers who had trained for invasion now faced new realities. Franz Müller, reassigned to a different theater, reflected on the moral ambiguity of war. Victory had been delayed not by heroism alone, but by an interplay of human decision, natural forces, and technological limitations. Hitler had, in a rare moment of calculated restraint, preserved his forces, but at the cost of ambition and ego. Historians later debated the ramifications. Abandoning Sea Lion arguably changed the trajectory of World War II. Britain's survival allowed for sustained resistance, coordination with Allied forces, and eventual participation in the liberation of Europe. Hitler's decision was both tactical and psychological, an acknowledgement that even a dictator cannot always impose absolute will on the world. The story of Sea Lion's abandonment became legend among soldiers and generals. It illustrated a rare interplay between human limitation, strategic realism, and the resilience of those who resisted conquest. Even as Germany pressed east, the shadow of the Channel remained, a symbol of what might have been. By summer 1941, Operation Sea Lion was a historical footnote, overshadowed by the Titanic clash on the Eastern Front. Hitler's obsession with Britain lingered in his thoughts, but operational reality had shaped history in ways even he could not control. The psychological, logistical, and human lessons were stark. Ambition, untempered by reality, risks disaster. Human courage, exemplified by the RAF and British civilians, can alter the course of empires. And the sea, impartial and vast, defied even the most meticulous plans. Franz Müller, older and reflective, recounted stories of the air campaigns, the abandoned invasion, and the weight of unfulfilled orders. He described the fear, the hope, and the strange exhilaration of surviving in a war that demanded the impossible. His memories, personal yet emblematic, captured the human element of strategic decision-making. Ultimately, Hitler's decision to abandon Operation Sea Lion was more than a military choice, it was a pivotal moment in history. It underscored the limits of dictatorship, the unpredictability of human and natural forces, and the courage required to confront reality, however reluctantly. The Channel remained unconquered, Britain resilient, and the world forever changed by a choice made in the cold winds of 1940.